Hey, friends, welcome back to Studies in Counseling, where we're inviting in leaders in the field and having interesting and engaging conversations and asking the stimulating questions, hopefully, and having dialogue about them. And today I am so very excited. I've been looking forward to it all day to be here with Dr. Joffe Ellis. Hey, Dr. Ellis, how are you today?
I'm doing real well and looking forward to our conversation very much, Brian.
Me too, me too. Yeah, and thanks for being here. I wanted to ask you this question we've been leading off with about engagement and being engaged and being absorbed by things. And I'm curious, has there been and does anything come to mind that has been really absorbing you recently, or you've been really engaged with, either in your work, in your counseling work, or just in life in general?
What a great question. I
Thank you.
don't think I've been asked that before. Wow. The first thing that comes to my mind, and I have a hunch there's more than one thing, as your viewers, listeners can tell, we haven't rehearsed this or planned, and I prefer that. There's no list of questions I've given you or you've given me, so I
Yeah.
like this. The first thing that comes to mind is the language that I hear on TV, in news programs, or when people comment on the news, could be in print media, social media. Language, and I'm not talking about swearing or the F word, I'm talking about saying things like, it's normal to be anxious at this time. I should be anxious, and I was hearing this a lot when COVID was more of a more present, thankfully, not that it's disappeared, but things are somewhat safer now. And but particularly in the first year, 2020 and all, I don't know who I am anymore, but this is normal. And even so-called experts, psychiatrists on whatever programs that were being interviewed by mental health at that time, during a time of crisis of panic, would put out that message. And I think and feel that that is such a disempowering, unhealthy message. The way I see it, and the way rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, would see it, is when something is common, when it's happening a lot, when a whole huge number of people are going through a similar thing, it doesn't mean it's normal. Now, the connotation of normal means you should be feeling that way. And, there's this expression, all the birds can be flying in the wrong direction. And so this idea, I'm anxious and I should be anxious, and when will this end? And I need to know. And it just was perpetuated by people in the media. And so, and I still hear it these days. And so, to answer your question, the sloppy use of language by people in power is something I've been thinking about.
Very interesting. Yeah. So I'm hearing themes. One, you're paying very close attention to the kind of discourses, what's being said in the media, and noticing some assumptions that are being made that are about our power, our agency when it comes to our mental health. And you're coming from a theoretical frame of reference where you challenge that, maybe dispute some of the media discourses.
Yeah. Well, with rational emotive behavior therapy, step one is to identify the irrational beliefs. So in the example I gave, that it's normal to feel anxious, a more specific anxiety-inducing thought would be, this is terrible and awful, and I just can't stand it. And so the disputation is, well, let's get clear about our definitions. If awful means the worst that it possibly could be, even though it's very, very bad, the fact is you, whoever you are, are still alive and thinking, capable of thinking, yeah? And you're still here. And so where is the evidence that you can't stand it? Where is the evidence that it's the worst thing ever? Let's get a little perspective. Has there ever been a time in human history in which there have been no challenges? Whether it's a pandemic or a war, I mean, this is still happening now in different places, wars, hello. A quote from Albert Ellis, I'll keep it clean. He had a certain wit. All humans are out of their effing minds. But the follow-up is, we're born humans who aren't cognitively impaired, talking about humans who aren't, have the ability to think rationally and irrationally. And sadly, a lot of people aren't taught the difference. And so as little ones, we learn things by osmosis, by observation, and then by what we're actively taught. And one of the things I love about REBT is that it educates us and reminds us that it's not our circumstances that create our unhealthy emotions, but the view we take of them. Sound like Stoic philosophy? Yes, Epictetus, he was one of the influences on Albert Ellis. Yeah, and so with awareness, we have choice, yeah? So anyway, I don't know if I've gone a little bit all around the mulberry bush, but, the first thing would be to identify as clearly as possible the irrational beliefs that we're telling ourselves. And then to dispute by asking, where is the evidence? Can I really not stand it? Is it helping me or hurting me to believe this? Does it really follow? Is it really logical? And then when answering those questions, usually very rational, realistic, and often optimistic answers, not idealistic, romantic, but hopeful often, or pragmatic answers emerge. And these can be our new rational thoughts. And through repetition, the old irrational thinking tendencies can be replaced. It's a biological fact. Neuroplasticity demonstrates that.
Yes. Okay, so we started our conversation out talking about engagement, and it's clear as we're getting into REBT that you are really like immersed, and this is a lifestyle for you. You're talking about the history and the practice of it, and it's just so fascinating. I can hear that as we're getting to know each other. And maybe I could just tell a little story of how I heard of REBT, and then you can help us fill in the gaps and tell us like about because I come to it as kind of an autodidact using it in the field. And I learned about REBT and Albert Ellis's work through smart recovery. Yes. And so I work as a drug and alcohol counselor, and I was noticing in my work that there were people looking for different alternatives in recovery. So I started learning about smart recovery. And what you were talking about, what I can report just very broadly from talking to people is, there are a lot of cultural narratives, kind of like the media, about addiction. There are a lot of assumptions, like this is going to be very, very hard, and this is going to be a lifelong process, which may or may not be true, right? These are just ideas. And as people kind of were invited to think about their experience, like how bad is this urge? How bad is this? You got a wide variety of answers, some being, this feels really, really hard. Some being like, actually, I haven't felt an urge in a couple of weeks. It's kind of nice. And it was just interesting to be invited in as the group to looking. And that's what I took away from REBT. It was like everyone was in a laboratory of one, and we got to have this conversation about our inner experience. And yes, I'm curious, like what strikes you as some kind of reflecting about REBT? What do you think are some of the important things that counselors should know about REBT? And yeah, maybe just a couple of those probing questions.
The brief way, the elevator version description that I sometimes give, if someone were to say, what's REBT? I would say a no-nonsense, evidence-based, scientific, the pioneering cognitive approach, which is imbued with compassion. Imbued with compassion. And so I think some of the things that are unique to REBT, that, or if not unique, life enhancing, the fact that in all probability, it's the pioneering contemporary mindfulness approach, inviting us, encouraging us, urging us to think about our thinking. You know, with awareness, we have choice about what we do, what we think, and thereby what we feel, and then that it will impact how we behave. So there's that. There's the invitation to learn, and you don't need to be an academic or highly educated to learn the difference between the type of thinking that minimizes emotional suffering and thereby creating a more empowered life, really. And by the way, no time, I think, to go into this other than for me to mention that ton of research proves that people who think in healthy ways, practice daily gratitude, create healthy emotions, live on average 15 years longer than those who don't.
Wow.
You know, there's a lot of research, like in the journal, I'm not talking like oblique kind of journals, Journal of the American Medical Association has had a number of articles on the impact of daily gratitude on people, let's say, with cardiovascular issues. A study was done on people with the same kind of vulnerable situation, and there was a group that practiced daily gratitude as a long-term study and one that didn't. And yeah, those who did on average lived 15 years longer. And again, they all had the similar vulnerability, age range, and so forth. You know, and there's a lot of people who regularly create, and notice my language, create rage, because REBT reminds us it's not what happens, but what we tell ourselves about it that creates our emotions. We create our emotions, not the circumstances. I'm not denying a biological component, but I'm starting to talk about too many different things now. So anyway, people who experience chronic rage, and I'm not talking about the occasional angry outburst, no, but daily kind of consistent rage, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, weakened immune system. I mean, I could go on and on. So that's my completion about my acknowledgement of the impact of healthy or unhealthy thinking and emotions on our physical well-being and longevity. So what was I talking about? REBT. And yeah, so it educates the person who is motivated to craft their own lives and not to be victims of circumstance. But again, if we don't know we can, we really don't have the choice. So that's why my late husband and why I love to talk about it as often and to as many people as possible, and not only people in the field, because as you indicated in your introduction, Brian, it's, or at some point, something you said, it's a way of life. Yes, I am immersed in it as a way of life, as well as practicing it with my clients and teaching it at colleges and to professionals and to members of the general public. So I hope somewhere in that monologue I answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm curious, as I'm reflecting on what you're saying there about your love of REBT and sharing the kind of a message of empowerment and critical thinking and mindfulness. Can you remember back when you were first hearing about this? And can you talk about your history with REBT and like how you learned about it and what that was like to kind of first come across this for you?
Yeah. Do you want the short, medium, or long version?
Oh, is there like something like right between medium and long, like medium long?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do medium long. Okay.
Okay.
We're not going to start from the day I was born. All right.
All right.
My auntie was a psychologist. My aunt was a psychologist in Melbourne. That's where I was born and raised and educated. And I was a bookworm. I loved reading. And I remember going to her place and seeing various books. And for whatever reason, as a 12-year-old, weird, right? I would gravitate towards a few books she had by Albert Ellis. Little did I know then, I didn't even know then I was going to be a psychologist, let alone marry Albert Ellis. And by the way, he was a lot older than me. So anyway, that's where I first, it was so logical. And she would sometimes talk about it because she favored that approach as well. And anyway, then I decided, when I finished high school, and shall I do medicine? Shall I do law? Shall I do psychology? Because I was very lucky. I had the choice. And psychology was what I chose, and then learning about different approaches. And I adored REBT because it's so holistic. And I love the holistic approach. It constantly reminds us that our thinking and our emotions and our behaviors are inseparably entwined. And then the spiritual element, and spiritual, when I use that word, is very different from religious. Although, the religions do have a spiritual aspect. Not every human lives according to the spiritual. But anyway, what am I talking about? The emphasis. And this isn't seen in other cognitive approaches as much, although as the decades have gone on, Albert Ellis, before he created REBT, Freud ruled the roost. And Albert Ellis heralded in the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy. And then following that, some year he mentored Aaron Beck, and then 15 years after REBT, CT, cognitive therapy, now mainly called CBT, came out. And then later the third wave. There's a number of waves that have happened. I think we're up to our fifth wave, or their seventh. But ACT, that does talk about acceptance, similarly and differently from REBT. But anyway, going back to REBT, I love and loved the emphasis on unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, unconditional life acceptance, and the fact that it didn't just spout a nice, heartwarming philosophy. It gives the tools of how to create them, because it's not easy often for many people, for example, to develop unconditional other acceptance for someone who's abused them. But with the desire, with the motivation, and with the tools, and most importantly, ongoing effort, it's possible. And that can lead to, best case, forgiveness. But even if not quite, at least acceptance of what was, what is, and that we can change some things and not others, and so forth. So I love that component. I am emphasizing more than my late husband did, although he certainly agreed with this, the importance of daily gratitude. And I've already touched on what a benefit that can be. So whilst Albert Ellis and Debbie Joffe Ellis do not encourage any mentees or students to be like us, there's a vigor to REBT. Now, Albert Ellis was very zestful and vigorous and so forth. It's not about being like him. An effective therapist is like themselves. But there's a certain life force that can be expressed in an individual's unique, authentic way. That's part of REBT, because really one of the things at the heart of it is cherish life. Life is finite. Now learn how to think in the ways that make your life better and produce less suffering. So, yeah. And then when Albert Ellis he visited the University of Melbourne in Australia, which is where I studied. And it was very interesting that many of my fellow students and professors were very intimidated by him. And I was in awe of his genius and brilliance. But I and we got an opportunity to meet him and talk to him. And somehow from the get-go, I just felt totally at home with him, and I could see, feel, sense the kind-heartedness, the genuineness of the man behind the theory. And he was so authentic, and the theory is so empowering and encouraging. So anyway, would you believe that's the short, medium, long version?
Yeah, brilliantly done. I got the main points and also kind of the feeling of it. Yeah, which I was really interested in. And it's so interesting to me. You're talking about art and characterizing REBT through your history and what attracted you to it, through things like unconditional self-acceptance, through gratitude, through a life forward energy, as I was kind of parsing it, or like a zestiness. And I would have to say that these are not necessarily the things that I have seen emphasized in REBT and some of the learning, the broad overview that I've learned, which mainly focuses on like thinking and like the ABC model and things like that. Those are the things they talk about. So I'm curious, maybe counterpointing to what you just said, what are some of the misconceptions you're seeing out there? Or what if you were teaching a course on REBT, like what? Oh, yeah. If you were teaching, could you tell us maybe a bit about your course and like what are people missing, counselors missing about REBT commonly?
Sure. So I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia University Teachers College here in New York City, which is where I'm speaking from, where I live. And I'm regularly invited to speak at other colleges or give professional trainings or speak at conferences and the like. So the question is, what are some of the things that people may not know or that are misrepresented and there are myths? Okay, so well, the chronology, a lot of younger students I've met don't realize that Albert Ellis and REBT was the pioneering cognitive approach, as I mentioned a few moments ago. And it's a pity. I'm not just spouting this because I was married and he was the one. No, I think in any field, not only psychology, but the importance of not fake news, of facts, of integrity when reporting history, of the enrichment of knowing the roots of whatever you might be doing in any field. And so there's a misunderstanding that CBT came before REBT. Now, when I say this, I'm not in any way criticizing or comparing CBT and REBT. I'm just giving a chronological fact. Another thing, the different emphases. There were articles written in 2003 and 2005 by three authors: Aaron Beck, father of CBT; Albert Ellis, father of REBT; and Christine Podesky, who's a well-known CBT practitioner, trainer, writer, researcher. And they all agreed that REBT is the most philosophical of all the cognitive approaches, at least at that time in the early 2000s. Where they disagreed, and I disagree too, is Dr. Beck and Dr. Podesky said that CBT is more scientific. And the Ellises here disagree. Now, the fact of the matter is, and I think largely due to the fact that Dr. Beck was associated with the University of Pennsylvania and could supervise, arrange a lot of research. And Albert Ellis headed a not-for-profit institute. Nonetheless, there was a director of research there, so some was done there. But much more research was and is done on CBT, superb research. So, but the interesting thing is, I haven't read all the research, but I've read a lot of CBT research, and there's not one bit of it that doesn't also support REBT assertions, theory, premises. Not a surprise, because, and a lot of people don't know this, Albert Ellis was a mentor to Beck. Back early on in Dr. Beck's research on depression, he reached out to Albert Ellis, and they would correspond, and Al would give suggestions and so forth. And so at the heart of CBT are the principles of REBT. So, and actually in my late husband's autobiography, there are some of the letters to and from Beck, Ellis, Beck. Yeah. Another myth is that REBT is too confronting. And this relates a little bit to what you said about this is kind of, you've not heard before my emphasis on the zest of it and all. The effective psychotherapist in any modality, I would hope, adjusts their tone and their manner according to who they're working with. So I might be all gung-ho if I'm aware that this seems to be motivating and encouraging for a client. But with some clients, very much tone it down. If I'm working with someone with grief, so it's not one size fits all. And yet a lot of people, particularly a bit older, based on what they saw Dr. Albert Ellis do, and he was, think that's how one should be as an REBT practitioner. No, and he was not that way with all people all the time. Sure. Believe me, he wasn't. He was very intuitive, and he knew when to modulate and so forth. So it's that's a myth as well. There are probably some more, but they're the ones that jump to my mind now.
Yeah, it's great getting to chat with you and talk about the history and get like a more like a picture of that. Like you've brought up journalism a couple times, and like we're getting like the true picture and getting some of the empirical facts, which is really nice. And then getting into the confrontation and how we as when we're working with people, it's important to match their energy and connect with them. And there can maybe be some like stereotypes or something that jump out. This is kind of an intuitive question that's coming up for me. I've noticed as we've been talking, like I've been laughing, and I noticed listening to Albert Ellis, Dr. Albert Ellis, and some of his work, I would laugh a lot. Like I read Smart Recovery and REBT, and there's some confrontation there, especially in addiction. But then I'm wondering about any thoughts that come up for you on the role of humor in counseling, and humor, and maybe specifically in the intervention of confrontation. Any thoughts come up for you on that? Maybe as related to REBT or just in general?
Yeah, no, I love your questions. No, Albert Ellis actually said the following, and this I also teach this when I talk about REBT. Humor is very helpful in sessions with discernment.
Sure.
So why is it helpful? Because it helps give a broader, healthier perspective to those clients who take themselves too seriously, or others, or life. It gives a perspective. Laughing frees up the energy a bit. I don't say any, but some of rigidity. And Albert Ellis was often very witty, very funny. Now, some people didn't like his sense of humor.
Mm.
You're not going to please all people all the time. He wrote hundreds of verses, lyrics to popular tunes of the day called rational humorous songs. And often in workshops, sheets would be handed out and we would sing. In fact, I could deafen you and some of the listeners if you want me to
Please.
sing a song. But again, the idea is to lighten up, keep things in perspective, normalize some quirky human tendencies. And going back to what I said earlier in our conversation, normalizing is different from saying something is normal. It's more related to unconditionally accepting human fallibility.
Mm.
And it's common for a lot of us to think in screwy ways, which will cause unnecessary suffering. My husband suffered from many illnesses, or when I say many, not that many, but serious, from infancy onwards. And having a sense of humor was very helpful to him. I was only with him, I was a lot younger, and we got together when, we started our friendship, he was in his 70s, and I was, graduate uni. But, our relationship, he was in his 80s. And so I was with him in the final 12, 15 years of his life, though we were friends for longer than that. And never did he complain or dwell on his physical suffering. He owned it, he stated it, he looked for pragmatic, we looked for ways, to ease the comfort and heal. But humor was, again, something that was very helpful, that he modeled in his life, and then when giving presentations as well, and in his writings. And you nodded when I suggested singing a song, which I regret a little, but I don't really regret
Okay,
it.
let's hear it.
If you want to hear someone, well, I'll have to rely on the words in one of the books. But can I tell you before that an example of his humor in a dire situation, but it's a bit genital.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Isn't that an overgeneralization?
I don't know. We might have to bring some psychoanalysis in for interpreting my interest in genital humor.
Oh, let's not.
Let's not. Okay, we'll stick with the REBT.
On that. Yeah. So a serious situation in 2003, a few months before his 90th birthday, he nearly died. So he was a brittle diabetic for decades and would monitor himself all the time. He'd take his blood and was able, with the little, whatever you call the device, see blood sugar high or low. If it was high, he'd inject himself. If it was low, he always had orange juice or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on hand. And anyway, but this was a condition, brittle diabetic. And one morning, again, he was 89 years old, and he was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I think he was about to take his blood, and all of a sudden his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. I call 911, race to the hospital, they do a quick scan, and the whole of his large intestine, I'm leaving out a few of the very gory details, but what was seen was his whole large intestine was massively infected, about to burst, which would have killed him. So they had to perform emergency surgery there and then. It was decided they're going to remove all of that, and he would have to have an ileostomy bag. And, all going well. They let me know he's 89. It's always risky, but all going well. He should be able to get back to doing what he's doing in his life right now, because I knew that would be a concern for Al, and indeed when I was walking with him, is that they were wheeling him towards the surgery room. Is that surgery in the operating theatre?
Yeah, operating room.
English, yeah, thank you. So, so I was telling him quickly what's going on, and will I be able to work? He was so dedicated. Will I be able, yeah, yes, yeah. And so then he reiterated again, can you see we're heading towards the doors beyond which I can't enter, and I'm talking with him, and it'll be all right, darling. And so he reiterates, so they're going to remove my large intestine, and yes, darling, this is going to be all right. And then he says, at least they're not taking my balls.
Yes.
Now,
Priorities.
Now, how many of us really in a life-death situation, which it was, would be able to joke about it? But he was in that habit. He'd gone through a lot of adversities, most of which I probably won't have time to share with you in our time now. And humor was a tool, and a tool he encouraged in other people. And research shows the impact of serotonin and all the positive chemicals it stimulates. It strengthens the immune system. Laughter, the best medicine, a cliche, but there's some truth in it.
Yeah, that's such a brilliant story. And yeah, just from an inspiration, like taking it, being able, that kind of environment of anxiety and kind of existential environment. Yeah, and being able to kind of, it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to share that.
Yeah, and he was also doing it for me. Because he knew how concerned I was and wanted me to laugh, that's very much at the heart of REBT. I started saying earlier in our conversation, the spiritual aspect of it. One of the main aspects is to care about and help other people. You don't have to be a therapist to do that. So he was very caring to me, to one and all, really. And his life was dedicated to helping people learn how to help themselves, suffer less emotional suffering, and enjoy this fleetingly, quickly passing life. Yes, enjoy to the max. I'm tripping over my own words.
Yes,
maximum enjoyment, minimum suffering that we create.
Yeah, it's such an important sentiment. The kind of fleeting nature of life, and how nice it is to be alive and have this opportunity. And as helping others as counselors or just as human beings, minimize the amount of self-inflicted suffering and create conditions for peace and well-being. It's a brilliant act. But of course, now the people listening are like, okay, shut up, Brian. Let's explore one of these wonderful, rational, emotive songs. And so can you talk about this? So first of all, we can find these where?
Oh, okay. Well, in a number of his books, I'm just reaching out to what's at hand, because I didn't know I was going to sing a song. Neither did you, right? Don't you love spontaneity? And you may regret this, but anyways, I guess so. This is a primer that I wrote, the second edition of, and the first edition I mainly wrote it. We got the contract 4 months before Al died, but he's rightly an author because I used chunk of his original material as well as what I wrote. So this is the textbook, one of the textbooks for my students at Columbia Uni. And then a number of the books he wrote, he included. And, you can just Google Albert Ellis books. There are more than 85 published books, thousands of published articles and so forth. And that's his autobiography. That has some as well. So I'm sorry. So I'm looking in the index so I can find a song to torture you all with.
Excellent.
Humorous songs. Have you ever heard one of them?
Must be the biggest crime against the history of REBT, that this method has not been taught more and has not been disseminated more widely. So that is something we will intervene today against, and we will make sure this methodology is spread into the future, because I have not heard of it, and I'm very excited that I'm learning about it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I'm sorry for
No rush.
let me try.
The
I'll
memory.
I will. Somewhere in here are songs by Albert Ellis. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We could also try to develop one. What's like
you first.
What's like a popular song right now? Oh, I've got it. I've got it. What if we did one with John Lennon's Imagine? Imagine there were no distortions.
Oh, I love
that. That's where my creativity runs up. So if you would say something like, imagine there's no distortions, and then what's a distortion? Like there's neither black nor white. Maybe we could do black and white thinking. That actually fits in the vision of the song.
Yeah.
Flexible thinking.
No one to blame our dysfunctions on.
Yes.
No one to blame for our fights.
Beautiful. You have an excellent voice. I thought I was kind of looking forward to someone. Wow, it's so impressive that they don't care, they're singing. How you talked about yourself, but it turns out you have a beautifully stunning voice. So I'm sure it's a very affective experience for your students and people you're teaching to break out into song.
Only if I want to torture them.
Okay.
I found some. Okay. So I'll sing. This was one of, when I say Al's favorites, there were a few he regularly got students and attendees to sing at workshops. And it highlights human fallibility and the tendencies that many of us might have when we're in relationships to have demands and expectations about how our partners should love us. Okay, so after you've complimented me on how good I sound, I think I'm about to dispel that, but it felt good while it lasted.
Okay, yeah, fleeting.
That I sound great. So it's to the tune of T42 by Vincent Youmans, but Albert Ellis wrote the lyrics. So picture you upon my knee, just you for me and me for me, and then you'll see how happy I will be, dear. Though you beseech me, you never will reach me, for I am limited as any real mystic, and only relate to myself with a great to-do, dear. If you dare to try to care, if you'll see my caring soon will wear, for I can't pair and make our sharing fair. If you want a family, we'll both agree, you baby me, then you'll see how happy I will be.
Bravo, bravo.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Oh, really, really?
Yes, excellent.
Actually, this one is better on that. Love, oh, love me, only me, or I will die without you. Make your love a guarantee so I can never doubt you. Love me totally, really, really try, dear. But if you demand love too, I'll hate you till I die, dear. Love, oh, love me all the time, thoroughly and wholly. Life turns into slushy slime unless you love me solely. Love me with great tenderness, with no ifs or buts, dear. If you love me somewhat less, I'll hate your goddamn guts, dear.
Oh my gosh, wonderful. Yes, excellent.
there's another one I could sing, but maybe that's enough for now. And if we have time and you
We can revisit.
we can revisit.
Yes, yes. And wow. I love it. I love bringing the arts into counseling, and it helps us remember these things too. It's very memorable. It is the first guest. You are, congratulations, the first guest in the history of studies in counseling who's broken out into song. So that hopefully a new tradition will be inspired, or we'll get other guests. But yes, I'm curious because we've been talking about REBT and Albert Ellis and you. I'm kind of wanting to ask a question more about you and your process. So you're working with clients, you're teaching the Columbia course, you're doing writing, and you're doing lecturing and speaking, all types of interesting things. I'm curious, this one is process. So like, how would you describe your kind of, I want to say like creative process. I don't know if that's kind of the right word, but when you're thinking about ideas and generating speak talks or writing or core education, like what's that kind of like for you? Like, how do you develop that, your work?
Well, I love your questions.
Thank you.
The REBT principles, they're the guts of it, they're the framework, they're the bones of the body of what I hope to present. But I love spontaneity. I love giving live demonstrations where I'll call on someone, either a student or if I'm talking to whoever the group is, an attendee, who's willing, I don't want to do a role play, who's courageous enough to bring up a real issue so I can demonstrate the efficacy, the no-nonsense element, and the compassion of REBT. You know, people can read books and see videos and YouTubes, but to see it live and in action, so that allows me a little creativity, although I'm very much sticking to the formula, but adjusting it according to who I'm talking to. I bring in creativity because I do my best to stay up with current affairs, or if I'm talking to a specialized group, I pay attention to what they're interested in or what they're studying, and I try to use examples or anecdotes that they would enjoy or relate to. Because, you know, one of my goals is to teach people the simplicity and yet power of REBT and have them feel that it's not difficult. It requires ongoing effort for certain conditions, but it's not difficult. It's not difficult to brush our teeth every day, but if we don't, we'll suffer, or our teeth and gums probably will. So another way I bring in creativity is when I'm doing my one-on-one counseling, and with REBT and other cognitive approaches, it's quite common that at the end of the session, the client and the therapist collaborate on some homework activities. Because in REBT, certainly we remind the person, yeah, it's important while you're seeing me for therapy, what happens in our hour together. But more important is what you're going to do in between sessions. And then when we terminate, in a sense, our therapy sessions. So, and then I can be creative. For example, I can even show you.
Great.
Even show you, I think. Yes. Sorry. I'm surrounded by my notes and my books here.
It's beautiful.
So if I am working with someone who is artistic, who loves drawing, and one of the goals in REBT is to encourage people, and when appropriate, to voluntarily brainwash themselves voluntarily. In other words, catch their irrational thoughts, as we spoke earlier, dispute the life album. See, one of the other things I adore so much about REBT, unlike some other cognitive approaches, which say identify your dysfunctional beliefs or distorted cognitions or irrational thinking and replace it with healthy beliefs, rational thoughts. But REBT, ultimately, yes, wants that. But it goes that much deeper because it says before you replace the irrational beliefs, dispute the guts out of them, dispute the life out of them. Because if you still believe them, they'll keep coming up.
Mm.
You no longer believe them if they've lost their credibility because you keep asking yourself, hang on, where's the evidence? Can I really not stand it? Then even if they've been habitual and practiced or believed over time, neuroplasticity with constant erosion, they will diminish. And with constant repetition, the healthy new beliefs will come to the fore. So anyway, with that in mind, one of my clients who gave me permission to, I'm not giving away their name or anything like that, and I've got their permission. I know that this person loves drawing. And one of the rational beliefs that we agreed would be very beneficial to her is this mantra, which I've often used for myself and I share it with others. I can stand what I don't like. I just don't like it. And so she created
Aww.
this very sweet poster that she put on her wall. And then one of the things that we were working on, unconditional self-acceptance. I am you. And these are her words. I am unique and of worth just the way I am.
Mm.
There is nothing about me that I need to change to make myself more valuable. I'm in control of my behaviors. I can always work to refine and change them and my thinking and feelings.
Wow.
And then another one I'm not going to read. But anyway, so she would immerse herself in creating these Albus Dumbledore. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times when one only remembers to turn on the light. So REBT, the light of awareness. And the last thing I'll show you, the second last thing, isn't that beautiful?
Wow.
Is how she put them all on her wall and looks at them multiple times every day, and it was really impactful. So I don't give that homework to every client. Some people don't enjoy drawing or have that aptitude. So part of REBT invites the therapist and the client to be creative in finding effective ways to help themselves change their thinking for the better.
I wonder if this resonates. It's so beautiful. I'm so grateful to your client who's consented to sharing their work with us because it's so valuable to see and get an inside look at that work y'all are doing. I'm wondering, because another question I had was, how can you translate theoretical work into clinical practice? And you kind of answered that. And I'm wondering if this resonates. I was almost thinking of the haiku form. And the reason I was thinking of haiku is sometimes when I give myself like a limit, a constraint, it opens up certain levels of creativity. And it seems like you've taken the principles of REBT and really been able to apply them. You've stayed very true to the principles, but you do it in very unique, interesting ways. And I was thinking of like haiku, you do have limits that you set for yourself, but you're able to kind of each expression of it can look like different and be kind of unique. And I was wondering if that resonated, or maybe it's just my own image, but what do you think of your practice as like a kind of creative restraint, if that makes sense?
It's funny, for some people that description, which is wonderful, would apply. For me, REBT is not restrictive, actually. For me, REBT is open to growth. And I have my roots, the trunk of the tree and the roots are well nourished, well watered and fertilized with daily helpful thinking. And then there's just limitless potential to remind myself of helpful thoughts during the day. One of the things that I find really helpful, and perhaps you and your listeners are recognizing that so many elements of REBT are either common sense or wisdom found in a whole lot of other places as well. Because wisdom is wisdom. Many similarities with Tibetan Buddhism and with elements of every religion that I know of. I don't know of every religion. I'm not expert in any of them. But there's the kind of metaphysical side of things, interestingly, that have some similarities, and not just metaphysical, but, you know, using the mind in healthy ways, gratitude, kind to one's neighbor, treating another as you want to be treated, compassion, self and others. Anyway, so for me, I don't feel any restriction or boundaries. I feel grounded, and then the freedom to flourish and express and create certain branches that some people might enjoy and relate to, and others.
That is fascinating. Yeah. So I guess as I was listening to your talk, that makes a lot of sense to me, because in your words, and also what I've understood about REBT, is it's about flexibility, right? There's an element of flexibility, flexible thinking. Yeah. And you really embodying that and expressing that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So we've talked about engagement. We've talked about process, and I just have one other chunk I wanted to hit with you, which is this word development. And so I'm curious for you, you've been able to talk about your history, but maybe we can hone in a little bit. Like, how do you think your interests and passions have developed over time, over your career as a counselor? Have you noticed things developing for you, and maybe could you reflect on this idea of developing passions and interests?
Wow, Brian, you ask such great, thoughtful, beautiful questions. My passion has increased as the years have rolled along, because as I have had more experiences, as one does, unless one lives a very boring life or on a desert island, and challenges, some lovely experiences and some incredibly difficult ones. So as time has rolled along in my life, and with my personal situations, I have experienced how REBT has kept my being afloat during some times where many people said to me, "Don't know how you survived, don't know how you didn't go crazy." I can give you an example if we've got time, or I can be specific when I finish answering your question. So that, I hope, may allow me to express or have people perceive my authenticity, because I am 100% authentic. I can't think, REBT would hesitate to say 100% because that's absolutistic, but as far as I can recall, 99.999%, I speak truth. I don't twist or turn or distort. I'm not saying that sometimes that doesn't have a place. You like with little kids, you can stretch reality to engage them more, but I really don't think that I do that. And so I think as the years have gone on, my passion has increased because I've experienced the fruit of regular practice. An article that I wrote, I'm not sure if I sent that to you. I can if you want me to, and you can share it if you want. It was published in the APA Journal of, do I have it here and do I remember the name of this? But yes, here it is. Oh my goodness.
Perfect.
I have everything here. So spirituality in clinical practice. It's an APA Journal, volume 2, number 1. And I wrote an article on gratitude. And long story short, I've been practicing REBT for many, many decades. As you've pointed out, it has become folded into my way of being. It is a way of being for me. And one of the ways I replenish and rejuvenate myself is I go for walks. I'm pointing in this westerly direction. The Hudson River is literally a minute walk from
cool.
where I live. I know. And I go for long walks, and there's a shared path, bicycle and pedestrian. And one day I was walking on the pedestrian path and saw a cyclist coming, speeding in my direction. I just got this gut feeling he seems to be coming for me, as if he will hit me. And I moved as far over on the pedestrian side as I could, but he barreled right into me, and I fell right back. We've got concrete here, and the last thing I can remember before I lost consciousness was, I don't have time to save myself. Meaning, as a child, my mother taught me, if you're going to fall forward and protect yourself. And so I didn't have time to fall forward. And I lost consciousness, I don't think for very long. And to his credit, I suppose, he waited, this bicyclist. And when I came to, he's like, "Are you all right?" And I sat up, and I gauged that thankfully nothing was broken. I was dazed and kind of sore, but I could still think and hear and see, and nothing was broken. And honestly, the first emotion, attitude, thought combined in one that I remember having was gratitude, because it wasn't worse. And as I write in the article, it's not that I was born a saint, although my parents were very, very amazing people. We could have a whole hour talking about what I learned from them. But they focused on what was positive in life. They had survived literal hell. They were in concentration camps for 5 years in Europe during the Second World War, and wow, made it to Australia, started new life, and were grateful, beautiful, loving people. So it was modeled for me, as well as my learning REBT. Anyway, and he's like, "Are you all right?" And I'm like, very calm. But I said to him very strongly, "You've got to be more careful. You could have killed me. You could have killed yourself." "Oh, I'm sorry. He said, "I get in a zone." And he's like, "Is there anything I can do?" And I love animals. And the first thing that came to mind was, send $50 to the ASPCA.
Nice.
And then he said, I got up and I gauged, am I all right to walk home? And which was very nearby. And he's like, "Is there anything I can do? I'm so sorry." And I said, again, with authenticity, "We can all make mistakes, but please be more careful." And I think he was tearing. He said, "Thank you. I've learned so much from you," which is weird. And not that I want to be a teacher. Okay.
Yeah.
I went to the hospital, and it was a pretty bad wound and concussion, but I survived, and not too demented as a result. But I guess, what is my point? Oh my goodness, I'm going all around the mulberry bush here. And my passion, it works. It really works. So yes, so a lot of people said to me afterwards, "I would have been so enraged," and I wasn't. And I'm so happy that I wasn't. And that's because of years of practicing REBT. So I'm passionate about it, because I've seen how it works for me. I've worked for a lot of decades, and I've seen how people have changed their lives. You have too, Brian, I'm sure, through SMART.
Yeah.
When you practice the principles, you can change your life, even if there are endogenous tendencies. they can be changed. Even if a person has that tendency to anxiety, addiction, it can be changed through willpower and ongoing effort. So yes, in conclusion, this very long, sorry, answer to what you asked me, I've developed greater passion because I've seen in myself how it works. I felt it. I see in so many others the impact, and what the world needs now. During the pandemic, I wasn't anxious. I didn't make myself anxious. And so many people, even psychologists, my colleagues and friends, did. And so I want with all my heart, I think I've got a lot of good decades yet to spread the word. I want to increasingly do so. I hope I inspire others, including you,
Absolutely.
my students, to do so. It's not a religion, it's not a cult, but it's got damn good principles that work. And I love that it's imbued with compassion.
Yeah, and isn't your story, this brilliant story, it's such a encapsulation, it encapsulates a lot of those principles, right? Because it has in it the gratitude and the recognition that this could be worse, and kind of the softness, the sweetness, self-compassion, and compassion for, but it also has the kind of reality principle, the authenticity, which is like, hey, like you did something wrong and like don't do that again, please, and pay $50. It's very balanced. It brings in, I think, the whole system. And I think maybe that is one thing I'm learning about the system more today, is the balance between, maybe sometimes there can be caricatures on either side. It can be too harsh or too soft or something. And it's really more complete. And that story really underlines that for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I mean, these podcasts you've called Studies in Counseling. And I think whatever the modality, if the therapist wants to contribute as effectively as possible, whether you put it in terms of striking a balance or being selective in what you're sharing, what you're encouraging, your tone, your manner, as we talked about earlier, that increases rapport. Research has shown the greater the rapport, the more effective the therapy can be. And it really increases the potential for greater effectiveness in the counselor role, the therapist role.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. And Dr. Joffe Ellis, you've been very generous with your time tonight. I could talk to you all night. It's been great. I do want to end on a question, though, a final question. And you've mentioned one thing I love, you've weaved this throughout our entire conversation, is referencing others. You've referenced your grandma, who just, your granny, your granny.
Aunt.
Aunt. I'm sorry, your aunt.
It's okay.
Yeah, your auntie, the psychologist, who made a big influence on you, and your parents, who were a big influence, and then Albert Ellis, who's a big influence. I'm curious, could you reflect on people, maybe more about them or other people in your life that have been mentors or influences? Like, give us an idea of who influenced you and maybe people we could check out. Does anyone come to mind as I'm bringing that up?
When you say people you can check out, so you mean publish people?
Maybe. I guess I am meaning that. I love when people talk about their families too. I guess whoever just comes to mind first. If we can check them out, great. If not, no worries.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the main ones, really. In terms of the famous people or the published people, this will shock you. Albert Ellis, whatever you get your hands on. Viktor Frankl, the search for meaning, and Ellis and Frankl were colleagues. They often spoke on panels together at conferences a few decades back. Yeah, wish there was more social media then, and more people recording them, because wow, there would have been a lot of really good content on YouTube and the like. Anyway, So my main ones would be my parents and Albert Ellis. The reason I corrected you when you said grandma, which of course is no big deal, but I never knew my grandparents because they were murdered. I don't know how, probably in the gas ovens in one of the concentration camps. And I don't have time to go into all the details of how my parents survived 5 years in concentration camps, but they did. And well, I'll give you a little one part of a much broader story, that they were childhood sweethearts in Poland, and newly married when the war began. And at first they were in the Warsaw Ghetto, and then they were taken to Buchenwald concentration camp. It's interesting you're recording this just a few days after Holocaust Remembrance Day. Anyway, my mother was in the female barracks and my father in the male barracks, and he would risk his life each night coming to the female barracks under my mother's window and giving her his crust of bread or whatever meager portion of food that they had been given. And one night he didn't come, and he never came after that, and the months and the years rolled on, and each one thought that the other one was dead. What had happened was he was considered skilled labor he was a radio engineer, and he was taken to another concentration camp. His parents slaughtered, his mother shot in front of his eyes, and my mother was taken to others. And then miraculously after the war, my mother's younger brother, who was only 14 when the war started and survived by entering the forests and being a partisan. So anyway, again, long story short, he found my mother, and what do? She was suffering from typhus or whatever, but still alive. And they were talking to a random person, not even a friend, my mother told this person her name, and he said, Joffe, I know of such a Joffe. He's going on the train tonight to Austria. And so my mother and my uncle the train station was miles away, and they got there and the train was warming up, and they're running through every carriage. And at the very back carriage, there's a man with his hat down asleep, and it's my dad.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so anyway, there are other tales that maybe for another conversation, but they made it to Australia, started a new life. And a few years later, my brother was born, and then in the next decade, I may have been a surprise. And so some people have said over the years, wow, Holocaust survivors, that must have been heavy. And actually, they express such gratitude for life, for good things. And I remember vividly my father so often, in front of me, saying, look how beautiful this is my mother's face, and these are his hands, and look how beautiful your mother is. And just their joy of life. Now, they shed tears when talking with friends about, and remembering, and each year at a certain type of year, the very somber, they would cry, they would see movies. So it's not like they forgot or repressed, but mainly they focused on what was good. And so they were my greatest models and teachers. And then probably another reason I loved REBT is that the guts of it aligns with what I have been brought up with. Focus on what's good, look for what's good in life, in other people. Be aware of the bad stuff, but it's not about, again, repressing or ignoring. But and so Albert Ellis and his whole story, he's sick from childhood onwards. And then, I had to cope with adversity. His parents were neglectful, and he chose, brilliant little genius that he was, not to focus on the fact that other children in the hospital ward had visitors regularly and his parents weren't visiting him. But he chose, I don't want to be sad. So he read the books in the kiddies' library. He talked to the visitors or the other children there. And he actively, I mean, the seeds of REBT were in Children's Hospital when he was 4 years old, because he actively made effort not to be sad. And then fast forwarding again, leaving out a whole lot, but in his final years, he was kicked out of his own institute. And the reasons, so he and I, we lived on the top floor of this 6th floor institute. At the bottom floors, lecture halls, therapist rooms, and so forth. And no one was allowed to talk to us for fear of being fired, because there were lawsuits going on, wrongful dismissal and elder abuse, and so he was, because of his health, mainly in our apartment on the top floor. But I, had errands to do, and if looks could kill, and so we had great opportunity to keep focused on not allowing ourselves to be devastated by the behavior and hatred of others, and focusing on what still was good, focusing on what can we do to make things better, and focusing every day on the love between us, which was at that time the best thing that we were experiencing, because it was really, really tough. Some of the people were people he helped in their personal lives and certainly professionally. And then for reasons of power and all of that, he was discarded at the end of his life because he was not liking some of the directions the institute was going in, and for other reasons, which I won't go into now. So we practiced what he preached till the very end, which takes me back to your earlier question about the where do I get my passion in as REBT goes on and is developed, because we practiced it under very bad circumstances and it helped.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear this account that you're giving, both of Albert Ellis's life, with like some level of neglect and sickness, and how the seeds of REBT were really watered and developed in that environment. And then you as well, as a pioneer of REBT, in your family environment, coming out of the Holocaust, this horrible thing that is haunting civilization still. We're able to somehow, and it makes sense, the connection with Viktor Frankl as well, of course, A Man's Search for Meaning. And it's just very poignant is the word that's coming from me, and that we do have this. It's hard to deny that especially in those two situations, if we do have models and examples who are able to work through that and find optimism and hope, that gives me a lot of optimism and hope that I can overcome the things that come up in my life and in my client's life. We do have models that have been able to accomplish that in the most difficult of circumstances that you could imagine. I mean, you couldn't really imagine more difficult than what your parents had gone through those stories. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. And also, I wouldn't have believed the way Albert Ellis and I were treated at the end if I hadn't have gone through it.
Right.
And yet, by remembering to focus on what we're grateful for, to keep things in perspective, and believe me, it wasn't denying the ugly reality.
Right.
We sought a lawyer to help us get justice. One lawsuit where Al was kicked off as president of the board, kicked off the board, he was reinstated by a judge, and the judge said what was done was disingenuous. And then the other cases for wrongful dismissal and elder abuse, he died before they could be completed, and I didn't have the money to continue with them. And so anyway, yeah. And then, so to see Al fighting to regain his health. But yeah, so I didn't mention, he was fired 3 years before he died. And we were not allowed to teach and present in the institute. And he's 90, right? It's not easy for him to get around. Physically, his body is suffering, mentally, cognitively, he's still fantastic. And so I was able to find a room in the building next door that we rented once a week for our weekly Friday night workshop. That's another thing that Al did. He brought REBT to the public. It was $1 at the, when he opened it in the started in the 1960s or 70s, and then $5 around until he stopped doing it. And anyone could come, and he would start. This is my famous Friday night workshop that I've given every Friday night for the last 47 years. To cure every screwball in town takes a long time, and you get free cookies and lousy coffee. And he would demonstrate with whoever would volunteer. So anyway, so I was able to find this room, and we rented. We pleaded with, please, can we rent the lecture hall in the building, because we were still living on the top floor, and they refused. And that's how we got pneumonia. We were going in winter, in autumn, warm building outside next door to give the workshop, and then coming back. And he got aspiration pneumonia 15 months before he died. And he was struggling to get better because he wanted to keep working. He wanted justice. He wanted to get his institute back or be able to work in it again, which it didn't happen. But there was an article, a lot of media coverage, and one article he was quoted as saying, I hate what they're doing, but I don't hate them. Conditional other acceptance. And it was the truth. He didn't hate them. He hated what they were doing. He said to me once, when they think the way they think, they've got to do what they're doing.
Yes.
So he practiced what he preached till the end. I did my best too as well. He was a model for me. My parents were models for me, and other people who show grace under pressure, forgiveness after tragedies. These are models of near the best behavior and attitudes humans can have in this, this one short life. Even if you believe in reincarnation, we don't get this package back again.
Yes.
And so it's good to have those role models, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I'm just extremely great. Speaking of gratitude, I'm extremely grateful to learn from you and have you as a model, and glad you're spreading that to everyone that you encounter. And it's been so nice to spend time with you and learn from you. And so you've mentioned a couple things that we could check out. So if we can find your gratitude article, which we'll post, and then if we want to get all up into your work and learn more about it, like what are the best ways to get to follow your work and take the next step with you?
Oh, thanks. So, well, I do have a website. I want to add to it, but it has some stuff on it. So www.debbiejoffeellis.com. And there are some of the video interviews, actually. I'll probably put this one up there as well.
Cool.
And there are articles. I've written a few little bits for Psychology Today and other interviews, written interviews. And I have an events calendar, so I'll put on if I'm giving a presentation here or there elsewhere. And then if someone's in the area and they're interested, hopefully they could attend. It is my mission to keep REBT out there, because it has been, up until this point, since my husband's death, very much marginalized, and CBT is kind of dominating. And I'm not being critical of CBT, I'm just talking about REBT. And so if anyone works at a college or organizes events or conferences, and wants me to speak on REBT, and I can tailor it to whatever the theme of the conference or whoever the group is. It doesn't just have to be therapists. You helped me and Albert Ellis with our mission to help as many people as possible learn they have a choice. If you don't know you have a choice, you don't have a choice. And learn to uncreate unhelpful habits and create helpful ones. So I'd love people to reach out. On my website, there's a way you can communicate with me, or my email address, debbiejoffellis@gmail.com. Yeah, thank you. And Brian, you're an amazing human being. The depth of your questions reflect your knowledge and your sensitivity and your desire to help people. And I have no doubt you've already had a ton of impact, and that's going to increase. So it's been a pleasure for me to be with you and with the listeners. Thank you for your insightful, reflective, wonderful questions and presence and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Dr. Joffe Ellis. Very meaningful to hear. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And let's, go get Dr. Joffe Ellis some speaking stuff. Especially, we're going to get you into Pittsburgh. I know I have a good feeling about that. But I want to thank everyone for listening. We'll be back soon. And have a good night, everyone.